Today's episode is brought to you by Loot Crate. Every other month, you'll get a crate of 4 to 6 horror collectibles, apparel, and lifestyle goods for your home or crypt, featuring fan-favorite movies, characters, and more. Since 2012, Loot Crate, the #1 pop culture subscription-based service on the planet, has had one mission in mind: bringing the joy and love of pop culture conventions to fans at home. They're dedicated to working closely with creators and licensed partners like Warner Brothers, Disney, Marvel, Pixar, Universal, Cartoon Network, Bethesda, Crunchyroll, and others to imagine new products and experiences for their looters. For the horror fan in your household, Loot Fright crates cater to old and new fans screaming for new exclusives to add to their monstrous collection, including items based off of The Thing, Aliens, The Fly, American Werewolf in London, and more, as well as original figures designed by artists like Alex Pardee. I received their November Loot Fright crate titled Roasting Over an Open Fire, which includes an exclusive Krampus figure, the first figure in a new Loot Fright exclusive series by artist Alex Pardee. Also included is a devil scarf, Krampus ornament, and more items to make you or your family and friends scream with delight. All of you subscribers will be diving into the March collection that is looking fantastic on their site. So, get a surprise mix of horror collectibles, apparel, and more from classic and current franchises delivered to your chamber door every month. Head over to the Loot Crate website linked down below and use code READ15 for 15% off your Loot Crate subscription. That's 15% off your first subscription when you use code READ15. That's READ15. I worked at 1-800-Flowers as a driver, and Valentines was our busiest season. What that usually meant is customers would start ordering as early as January to get their orders ready. I'm not talking about dozens or even hundreds of flowers being delivered. This was probably tens of thousands. As a driver, I knew I would likely be working almost the entire day. No one was allowed off, even though a few people did try. I did this for 6 years, and we knew that V-Day was about as crazy as it could get. Drivers were given extra money to get the flowers to the customers on time and take up extra routes. There were a few times, though, that working this hectic schedule got the better of me. I wouldn't pay attention to where the address delivery of roses would need to be sent and get them mixed up. Typically, customers wouldn't complain much. The company always offered a complete refund. But there were a few that got angry because of simple mistakes. This particular Valentine's, I started really early, I think 4 a.m. The facility where the delivery trucks are parked is about 20 minutes away, and I had to be there by 5, so I would grab a quick shower and swing by a local donut shop on my way to get a little pep in my step. It was cold and wet that morning, a precursor to this terrible day I was about to have. As soon as I made it into the facility, my boss told me the first of several problems. Our printing machines were done, meaning that nobody had gotten route logs for the day, and we would need to call into the main office if we didn't know how to find the addresses ourselves. I didn't want to let that bother me, but then he also told me that my usual truck was in the maintenance shop and I had to drive a replacement. Typically that meant that I was being given a rust bucket, and this drive was no different. I'm honestly surprised the thing didn't fall apart as I went about my route. I did think that all of the deliveries I was going to make would be fairly easy, since I was familiar with the area, so I went ahead and got started rather than waiting for my routing logs to be made. To be honest, I wanted to rush and get my hours in so I could go have a little romantic dinner with my own Valentine. The storm didn't let up when I got out on the highway, and traffic was terrible. But my first few deliveries weren't big issues. It wasn't until I was about 2 hours into my route that I made a big mistake and delivered a bouquet of roses to the wrong address. To be fair, though, it wasn't entirely my fault. Here's what happened. Whoever had placed the order accidentally forgot to update their address information, so instead of going to the new lover, I wound up delivering the flowers to the ex. I didn't know until an hour later when the guy called into customer service and complained. Apparently his ex got so upset that she went to actually slash his tires. Customer service insisted that I needed to return to deliver the flowers to the correct address. The guy insisted he didn't want a refund. He apparently didn't even care about his messed up car. "I just want the flowers to go where they were intended," was the response he gave. Easier said than done, really. Not only did I have to backtrack 20 miles, but when I got there, his ex refused to see me. "Why should I even cooperate this? I threw those trashy roses away the second I saw them. He can lose his money for all I care," she said through the door. I apologized and asked if she could direct me to the dumpster where she had thrown the flowers out. I thought that maybe if I took a picture of them and sent it to customer service, the dude would reason that he wasn't going to be able to salvage them. "It's downstairs around back. It's too hard to explain, I'll just show you," the ex told me. She came about 7 minutes later, dressed up pretty nice. Tight jeans, makeup. It looked like she was on her way out to a date herself. I tried to make small talk as she guided me down the fire escape. She blushed when I complimented her and said, "I just wish I had a Valentines to share it with. You know any good fellas in the area?" I got the impression that she was flirting with me, and I flashed my wedding ring ever so casually as we made it to the dumpster. "Seems like all the good men are taken. Or they're cheaters," she told me angrily. She lifted up the lid of the trash and told me the flowers were in there somewhere and then stormed off. I couldn't see the bouquet from where I was, so I made a big dumb decision and climbed into the dumpster to look for them. Anything to resolve this customer dispute and get back on my route. I pulled my phone out and I was using the flashlight to look for the flowers. Then I heard this loud lurch and looked up just in time for the lid of the dumpster to hit my head. I fell down in the trash as I heard another loud clang and then the woman's voice shouting obscenities at me. "Pig, you probably cheat on women too, and this is what you get." I tried to push up on the dumpster, but she had apparently lodged something very heavy on top of it. So instead, I was fumbling around the trash trying to find my phone. Thankfully, I left the flash on and found it pretty easily. Then I called the local fire department and told them where I was. I don't know how best to describe the next 20 minutes as I sat there in the trash waiting for rescue. It was frightening and suffocating. I have always been a little claustrophobic, and this wasn't helping. Plus, I wasn't sure when the trash truck came, and I didn't want to wind up in the compactor by accident. I tried a few more times to lift the lid to no avail, but it just wouldn't budge. I admit I got a little panicky. I screamed for help, thinking the fire department wasn't coming, and I even called my wife and told her that I loved her over the phone. It was bizarre to think that my whole day was going to be spent in a dark, damp pile of garbage. At last, I heard the firefighters arrive, and they shoved off what turned out to be a heavy piece of sheet metal to get me free. I provided them a statement and told them the apartment where the woman could be found. I was definitely going to press charges. Then I contacted customer service, reported the incident to my boss, and got back to my truck. Of course, I went ahead and clocked out for the day too. I needed to shower and also needed to calm down from that crazy, scary experience. When I got to the lobby, I saw the police were actually escorting the woman out, and she was shouting and screaming. When she saw me, she acted like some rabid animal. They actually had to taser her to keep her calm, as I realized that she was literally going to break free and beat me up right then and there. It was honestly the strangest thing I'd ever seen. A grown woman basically foaming at the mouth over a delivery of flowers. I had a good dinner that night, and my boss did compensate me for my time anyway. But that guy that made the mistake in the first place still insisted he wanted to get flowers sent to his lover, even if it was a day late. My response? How about you send another driver? I hate telling this story, not only because of how traumatic it was for me, but because it does show my age. My therapist tells me that I should learn to look for the positive in things, so the only way I really know how is by making light humor. This was the early 90s, and I was about 16 going on 17 working as a regular babysitter in our neighborhood. My parents had decided that the only way I was going to actually get a car would be if I was the one that saved up for the down payment. So every afternoon after school, I would tutor kids or watch babies, whatever I could to earn a few extra bucks. There was one couple, the Moores, that always paid exceptionally well, and on Valentines, they had a special request for me to watch both their 6-year-old and their 10-year-old so they could go enjoy a romantic evening together. We'll be back by 8, they said, and gave me about $50 just for ordering pizza, renting movies, whatever the kids wanted to do. I asked them both what they wanted, and they both chimed in with a request to go to the local video rental store. I knew that the Blockbuster wasn't very far, but I insisted that I didn't want to do that until I got confirmation from their mom. This being the age before cell phones that required I had to look up the phone number in an actual phone book and call the restaurant where they were dining. Those two boys were so eager to hear a yes from their mom, I thought they might explode from excitement. It took about 15 minutes for me to finally get in touch with their mom, who seemed a little frazzled that the only reason I was calling was so we could go to Blockbuster. "Yeah, that's fine. Just don't spend all their money and nothing rated R," she responded. When I told them, both of the boys squealed and ran to get their jackets. We left the house before it got dark and made it to the rental store in less than 10 minutes. Not surprisingly, it was pretty empty save for the cashier and maybe one or two other customers. "Go and pick out whatever you want," I told them as I grabbed some candy bars and popcorn. The oldest came back first with a VHS of some Disney sequel and asked if this was okay. I told him yes and then asked where his brother was, only for him to be surprised that I didn't know. Both of us went down the aisles looking for him, and for a split second, I got scared thinking that he had decided to play some terrible prank and run off. Finally, I saw him standing near the edge of an aisle talking to a tall, lanky man wearing an actual trench coat. It was very strange. And as soon as I saw this guy, I got a weird vibe and grabbed the younger boy's hand. "Sorry, I hope he wasn't bothering you," I nervously told the stranger. He immediately smelled funny, as if he hadn't taken a bath in a while, and he had this weird, crazy look in his eyes that told me he was trouble. I just had a feeling, and I desperately wanted to be wrong about it, so I yanked the kid away and berated him as we made our way towards the cashier. "What were you telling him anyway?" I asked. "Just that we was renting some movies and that we were home alone," the kid said innocently to me. And I don't know why that didn't make alarm bells go off in my brain right away, but I guess I was too busy paying for the movies and dragging them out of the store. When we were walking back towards their house, it finally registered what he had told me. "Did that man ask if you were home alone?" I asked. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, but I didn't want the kids to think that I was worried. And out of the corner of my eye, I thought that I saw someone following us. "I mean, he seemed friendly, asked a lot of questions about me," the boy responded. I picked up the pace and told them that we needed to hurry back to the house. I was positive now that we were being followed. I remember I looked back several times to see where the man was, but every time it felt like it was just barely out of sight. Once inside their house, I slammed the door shut and chided the kid for being so stupid. "Don't ever talk to strangers. That man could have done some serious harm to you." I remember thinking I should punish them both by having them go to bed early, but I had no idea how right I would be about my warning of the stranger. I glanced out the windows to see if I could spot him, and after calming down, I went ahead and let them pick a movie. I was also trying to convince myself my paranoia had been my imagination. Less than 10 minutes later, as we were watching the Angels in the Outfield movie, I heard a knock at the door that made me realize maybe I hadn't been cautious enough. I went to the front to peek through the blinds, curious to see that no one was outside. My heart was pounding now, as though I saw the man in the trench coat standing over near the bushes. I immediately told the boys to pull the blinds closed and then to turn off the lights. Next, I started to hear this stranger banging on the windows with what sounded like a stick. Was he just trying to frighten us? I remember wondering. If so, he was doing a stellar job because I was terrified. "Turn off the TV. Let's go to the bathroom," I said. I remember the Moores had a house phone up in their master suite, so I was trying to calmly herd the kids there as this wacko kept rattling against the outside of the house. The kids were getting scared now, especially the youngest, and he was beginning to cry. "Be quiet. Please don't be scared right now," I told him as we ran to the bedroom. I know that was a stupid thing to say, and I told them both to stay quiet as I reached for the phone, only to find that the line was disconnected. And this was the moment when a real sense of panic and dread was starting to overwhelm me. It was just past 6:30, meaning that their parents would not be home for at least another 45 minutes, and now with the phone lines down, I was positive that this stranger was going to try and break in and do us harm. Still, I insisted that they needed to remain quiet and calm. I got the older one to assist me in moving furniture to the front of the door as a blockade, just in case this guy actually tried to break in. And it's a good thing I did, because about 20 minutes later, I heard the shattering of glass and realized that was precisely what he had decided to do. I told them both not to make a sound as I tried to listen to where the stranger was. The one thing about this whole experience I will never forget is that the stranger started to whistle for us, like he was whistling for a dog. It was a loud, sharp, insistent whistle when he kept saying, "Here, boy. Here, boy, come here, boy." I swear I'd never been more scared in my life, and I ordered the boys to hide under the bed as footsteps came up the stairs. I was pretty sure, and felt as if though we were actually about to die. It happened just like a horror movie too. He was standing outside the door because I could see the silhouette of his shadow peeking under the master bedroom door. Then the blockade of furniture started to rattle as I heard him fiddle with it. He shook it violently for a while, but to no success, and then another long, indescribably quiet moment. I thought maybe he had given up. The kids were trying their best not to squeal or scream or even cry, but it was so hard to be perfectly still. At any second, I knew that he was going to be back. Then, he slammed his body against the door and it came slightly ajar. I remember jumping and holding the boys closer as he did it again, and then again, until at last he could squeeze in past the wedged furniture. All I could see was his shoes, leather boots that looked coated in mud. He walked slowly over to the bed and sat down, perhaps puzzling over where we were. He started whistling again, and I had to cover the younger boy's mouth as he let a leash fall over the edge of the bed. Did he know we were here? What sort of weird fetish was this supposed to be? He walked around the room, moving to the closet first and checking for us there. Then we heard the sound of the garage door downstairs, and I had never in my life felt so relieved. The stranger immediately ran down, and I heard shouts of alarm as Mr. Moore likely saw him trying to escape. And a few seconds later, Mrs. Moore was in the bedroom, frantically searching for us and calling out her children's names. I crawled out first and helped her youngest get out as she grabbed him and hugged him as tight as possible. Downstairs, Mr. Moore was trying the landline again to contact the cops, but it obviously didn't work. Honestly, I thought the crazy guy was going to come back and do us more harm, so I didn't even want to step outside the house until my parents came to pick me up. Mr. Moore told me that I was very brave and paid me extra for helping keep his kids safe. My parents also told me that I acted swiftly and decisively, and it could have turned out a lot worse, but I didn't feel very proud. I had trouble sleeping for a week after that, and any sound of a dog bark or whistle could trigger the memory and make me want to curl up into a ball and hide. I can honestly only share it now after all these years, thanks to a bit of therapy. Sometimes I do think about what could have happened still, had the parents not shown up. We were unable to contact the police, and they didn't show up till a substantial amount of time after, because we had no cell phones or any mobile devices available to us at that time. Would he have harmed us or killed us? The cops never did catch whoever the guy was, so the worst part is the never knowing. Except I know that at least I stopped babysitting for the upper class after that. My 2020 Valentine's was a little different because my family had to move in early February, so we postponed actual Valentine's until close to March. Then the pandemic hit, and I was one of the first in our family to be exposed. My boyfriend said that we could still do our Valentine's over Zoom, so we agreed to the next weekend. Honestly, I felt like one of those kids stuck in a bubble constantly. It was mind-numbing to see others going outside, and I couldn't. I didn't have any symptoms. I didn't understand why I was being locked away like some kind of criminal. Still, my boyfriend Robbie told me that he was going to make Valentine's special and insisted that we couldn't miss it, no matter the circumstances. Saturday rolled around, and as planned, I logged into Zoom, eager for the romantic surprise that he was going to pull off. Honestly, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I doubt it was like anything he originally intended. He had his camera set up right at an angle where I could see him in his entire room, 2 windows that were partially open to let in a breeze as he wore a silly blue suede shirt and matching tie. He had candles going and soft jazzy music playing. It was cheesy, so I couldn't help but laugh and giggle. Just trying to set the mood, he teased. Oh, so sexy, I told him, trying not to roll my eyes. Next, he waved a bouquet of flowers in front of the camera and said, "Roses. Your favorite. Don't they smell good?" And that joke was actually in poor taste because thanks to COVID, my sense of smell was completely gone for a little while. "Chocolates for you," he said next, waving a box of filled creamy chocolates near the screen. Then there was a strange noise right outside his window, like a scream, and he told me to hold on. I stopped and waited as he got up and looked out the window, and immediately noticed that panic was gripping his body. He ran past the camera and I heard him go down a flight of stairs. Next thing I knew, I heard more shouting from his open window. He sounded like he was having an argument with someone. Admittedly, my mind was frantically trying to figure out what was going on, and I kept shouting his name, hoping he would get back inside. It actually took him almost half an hour to do so, and I nearly called the cops myself. When he got back on camera, I wished that I had. Robbie had a bloody nose and a black eye, and I immediately asked what happened. "Someone just stole my car," he told me. I'm really sorry, I gotta go," he said. I didn't hear from him until the next day, and the cops found his car parked not far from where I live. According to them, the thief had activated the GPS and gone to the last location Robbie had put it. I suspected that maybe they intended to rob me next. The cops said they found traces of gunpowder residue in the car as though they had been carrying a recently discharged weapon. Robbie confirmed that they had shot at him when he tried to stop them, and that just made my heart sink even more. I didn't even hear the pop go off. I'm not sure why at the last second they decided to just abandon the car, but Robbie admitted to me a month later that he thinks he knew why they stole it in the first place. "I'd gotten you a promise ring, and it was pretty expensive. I don't know why I didn't think to bring it inside, but I left it in the passenger side seat. I think that must have been what they were after," he admitted. It truly was the most and least romantic Valentines I'd ever had. You know the worst time to have someone break up with you? Besides the occasional story of a runaway bride you read on Craigslist, I'm pretty sure that Valentine's is number 1 on the list. I never would have suspected that my boyfriend Caleb would actually dump me last year. Even though we had been going through some rough patches, I thought we had made it through. He hadn't given me any indication that things were going to take a turn for the worst. In fact, the week before Valentine's, he had already booked us a reservation at Red Lobster, gone out of his way to ask off for work, and told me he planned to really go all out to treat me. Then, early V-Day morning, I got a text that changed my whole world. He decided to dump me. Who does that? Is this like high school? I called him immediately to demand a response. "It's just too much for me, Molly. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner," he responded. He told me a bunch of reasons why he had this sudden revelation, but a lot of it sounded like bull. I knew Caleb. He always rambled like this when he was trying to hide the truth, and the more he talked, the angrier I became with him. "Just tell me you didn't cheat, please. I swear if you did, I'm gonna hurt myself," I said between bitter tears. I was experiencing an emotional roller coaster, but it was about to get worse from here. He promised that he hadn't cheated and insisted that I could still keep any gifts that he had sent, including the planned reservation. "I know this is all very last minute, but I need space. I need to know where I'm going and what I'm doing with my life," Caleb told me. He promised that he would keep in touch, but I could already tell in his voice that it was over. I was devastated. Honestly, I can't remember the first thing I did. Maybe I smashed something expensive or went to the bathroom and vomited. I was still reeling, and it felt like I couldn't make sense of the world around me. To be honest, I thought about self-harm. And to anyone out there who is ever going through this, please listen to me and realize no man is worth that. I'm so thankful I have had that epiphany, and I hope others do too. And come to think of it, this harrowing experience might have actually been my wake-up call, as crazy as that sounds. But anyway, there I was, trying to find the strength to stand when one of my closest friends, Felicia, texted me and asked if she could come over. I needed a lifeline to cling to after this whirlwind of a morning, so I told her to come immediately. When she got there, I think I fell into her arms and burst into tears. She was shocked but listened as I told her about what Caleb had done to me. And then she had this brilliant idea for us to go get drunk off of our butts, and it sounded exactly the kind of distraction I needed. Felicia has always been a good friend, and I knew that if I went with her, I was going to have a good time. I changed my clothes, put on makeup, and blocked Caleb from my phone. All of it felt very empowering. We went down to the lobby and called for a taxi to take us downtown, ready to live it up. When the taxi got there, I remember thinking that this day was turning out to be good after all. Felicia and I talked as the driver took us to what we thought was our destination. Felicia was extremely vocal about her disgust with Caleb and apparently all men. They always do this. Use us like playthings and get rid of us to move on to something newer and shinier, she said. I think I recall that the driver seemed tense whenever she talked like this, like it bothered him. I was so busy laughing or crying that I didn't pay it as much attention as I should have, and I also realized my memory is probably playing tricks with me because of how jarring the next thing that happened was. We were merging off of a highway to a street when Felicia made some joke about Caleb's prowess in bed when the driver abruptly sped up and we zoomed through a light. I remember being rattled and Felicia shouted to him to slow down. Instead, he just kept going, looking angry as a feral animal. "What's your problem, man?" she finally asked when he slammed on the brakes. I suddenly realized I didn't recognize the part of the city he had taken us to. Were we lost? Was something else going on? I can't tell you how much I wanted this to be a normal thing. Then he turned around and pointed a gun in our face. "Shut up and give me your phones," he ordered. Felicia and I immediately complied. He grabbed our entire purses after he took our cell phones and then started to drive again. Felicia and I were frantically trying not to be scared for our lives, but this guy was wasting no time getting us out of town. At some point, we crossed a bridge and he tossed our purses and phones into the river below. Then he kept driving to the country. There were several times in the drive that I thought about jumping from the car. I didn't know how to tell Felicia what I was thinking, though. We were both scared stiff by this sudden and surprising psycho driver that we didn't dare make a move. I think it was probably 5 by the time the taxi finally stopped, and we had arrived at what looked like a rental cabin. "Stay here," the driver ordered as he got out and went to his trunk. I had literally no idea where we might be, but I used those few precious seconds to tell Felicia that we should make a run for it. "If we work together, we can overpower him," I told her. And when he opened the door to his cab, I kicked him straight in the gut and shouted for Felicia to help me. She was right behind me, and we tussled with this guy for what was probably only 2 minutes. Sometime during the scuffle, he dropped his gun, and Felicia ran to grab it. As soon as she had it, she pointed it at the driver and demanded that he let me go. The way this dude was looking, the thought he might try something even crazier. But surprisingly, he complied and released me. "Give us your keys," Felicia demanded. He dropped them into the grass near my feet and leaned down to pick them up while my friend kept the weapon on him. "We're leaving now," she told the driver. Slowly, the two of us backed up toward the cab, and just as Felicia was about to get in, the guy rushed towards us. I swung the keys in his face and made him fall backwards with a twist. Then, I leaned into the taxi and revved the engine. I shouted to Felicia to go, and she got in the passenger side before tossing the gun out the window. I didn't want to think the nightmare was over until we got away from that cabin, and as we drove off, I could see the guy scrambling in vain to follow us. Neither of us spoke for a good 20 minutes. Then, when I think both of us had the chance to really calm down, I said, "What just happened?" Felicia had been going through the glove compartment and found a few clues. The guy had kept clippings of articles about weird white supremacy and BDSM, weird smut magazines, and what looked like a locket. When we got back into town, we gave it to the authorities and, of course, had to give statements as well. The whole thing, honestly, truly felt wildly surreal. And I later found out that that guy had been wanted in a different state for apparent murder. I know a lot of people say they come face to face with a killer without realizing it, and this was definitely, literally one of those times. It still scares me to think about it. I've been through therapy, but it's just so hard to get over how close I truly came to dying or potentially worse, all because my boyfriend decided to dump me. And I know it's not right to blame him. I wasn't thinking clearly, and maybe Felicia and I were just at the wrong place at the wrong time, but it could have gone so much worse. I guess the reason I even mentioned Caleb again is because when I told him about the whole ordeal, he just brushed this off like it was nothing. I know it sounded a little unbelievable that we went through all of that, but at least he could have had a little sympathy. I still to this day don't know what was in our conversation in the back of that taxi that just truly triggered that guy. Maybe because we joked about men or something like that. Who knows? Maybe that was just his intention from the very beginning. I have no idea. It was definitely the strangest, scariest, and most terrifying Valentines I'd ever had. My wife and I had an experience that was unforgettable last Valentine's for all the wrong reasons. I say that because not only did it end up with us breaking up and winding up separating about a week later, but we also had a creepy, scary encounter with a waiter that I'm pretty sure wanted to do us harm. The whole thing started early that morning with a bit of an argument that requires some explanation. My wife is a social media influencer and works for a makeup company that requires her to try on products and then advertise them online via YouTube. Ordinarily, this doesn't really bother me much, but I had been stressing for weeks that I wanted our romantic Valentine's to be a special day, so we would both have no work that day. For her, that meant no phone so we could focus on each other, exchange gifts, and enjoy a good dinner. I soon found out that Sarah definitely had an addiction for social media. We trial ran an attempt to go without any electronic devices about 10 days before Valentine's, and it was a failure which resulted in a fight. The problem that morning was about the same. She claimed that a client wanted her to film a long makeup video that would take about 45 minutes to an hour for her to upload and edit for her channel. I said I didn't mind it, but it got under my skin, and finally I had to speak my mind. "You're just acting so selfish, Justin," she told me when I got upset about the phone. "This is what pays our bills, you know." I'm not sure why, but financial problems have always been a part of our relationship, and this time it really triggered me, so we got into a bit of a shouting match for about 10 minutes straight. If you've ever dated or been in a relationship for a length of time, you know what I'm talking about. And you know that, like any typical couple, we finally decided to recommence our plans and go to dinner. Somewhere before that decision to apologize to each other, I did something really stupid and canceled our plans. We were supposed to go to this new restaurant that Sarah had her eye on for about 2 months. She had been talking about it and she knew I was supposed to take her. But because of the argument, I got petty and decided to just delete the reservation. "What? Did you really have to do that?" she shouted at me. I thought maybe because it had been a last-minute cancellation that the restaurant would think it was a mistake. But instead, when we got there, they had already given our table to someone else. Honestly, I shouldn't have been surprised. It was Valentine's Day and we live in a fairly small town. Everything was going to be super busy. Of course, that irritated Sarah and she got back on her phone, chatting to her followers or something while I tried to look and see where we could go. By this point, I knew our night was pretty much ruined, but I had no idea it was about to go from just couples problems to a full-blown nightmare. "Why don't we just go over to Olive Garden? They're almost never busy," I suggested. It wasn't her favorite, but she conceded to it, and we got there just in time for the dinner wine to be served. There were a few people there, but surprisingly not as many as I thought. We were even able to get a private booth in the back of the Italian restaurant. Unfortunately, though, by the time we were seated, I knew that I had my work cut out for me. Sarah's demeanor had turned ice cold, and she was now deliberately ignoring me as we both looked at the menu. Then the waiter showed up. I really wish I remembered his name. He was about 6 or 7 years older than me, darker in complexion and a little taller. I was probably so focused on Sarah that I forgot the little details. I think his name was Brian, but I'm not sure. Anyway, he offered us a sample of the house wine and we both declined, ordering our bread and soup instead. "For a couple on Valentine's, it sure doesn't seem like you love each other," he joked. He had no idea how true that was, but I decided once he left to go ahead and broach the topic since it was out in the open. "This wouldn't have happened if you had agreed to keep your phone off," I told her. Not sure why I decided to make it an argument, but Sarah jumped at the bait I dangled out, responding fiercely. "It wouldn't have happened if you weren't such an inconsiderate jerk. You know my phone is my livelihood, and I'm working hard to pay the bills and give us a life we can afford." Again with the money problems. She was really starting to irritate me with those, so I tactlessly responded. "You know, I wouldn't be in so much debt if you hadn't insisted on an elaborate wedding. And who spends the most money for the house? Sure isn't me." "You're just a child, Justin. This whole day proves that," she snapped back. Then the waiter returned with the wine, visibly shaken by our argument. "At least I know when to set aside time for you. You can't even do that," I told Sarah. Then the waiter decided to interject with his own opinion. "You both don't realize how lucky you are to at least have each other," he commented. I opened my mouth to make a sarcastic remark, but then noticed just how angry this guy suddenly looked. He was looking off in the distance with his rage in his eyes like he was trying his hardest to shut out a bad memory. Instead, he told us his story. Hard for me to shake it now how frightening and sad it was. I doubt I can ever forget a word he said. "I was married to my high school sweetheart for 10 years. We both grew up in a small Midwestern town and never knew how great our life was until one day it was taken away. I got in a speed trap and had an altercation with a police officer. I was placed behind bars and the cops trumped the charges up to an aggravated assault. Man, I wish I could have gotten my hands on him for real, because this was before dash cams, so it was my word against his. My wife uses the last of our savings to bail me out, and then we got into even more debt hiring a lawyer. It didn't help. The cop knew the judge, and I was locked up for 2 years. 2 years. When I got out, my wife left me. I lost my job. Everything. And here you two are just wasting time arguing about stupid stuff. It's repulsive." Neither Sarah or I knew what to say, but after a very long, awkward silence, my wife offered her sympathy. That seemed only to make him angrier. He slammed his fist down on the table and started rambling about how he had tried so hard to be a husband, to take care of his wife, and she walked out on him, and how that no one deserved to be in love. I remember a few of the other patrons looking toward our booth in concern. Honestly, he was acting so erratic that I became concerned and stood up to try and calm him down. He took it as an invitation to a confrontation and slammed my head into the table. Then he pinned my arm behind my back and shouted to Sarah to shut up. I'm not really sure how long I was there, maybe just 30 seconds. Sarah told me that he grabbed a knife and pressed it against my head as he started to talk about all the things he had endured while locked up. Then she started to cry, and somehow it snapped the psycho out of it. He dropped the knife and stumbled backwards, mumbled an apology, and just left. You would think that would have been the end of it, but it wasn't. When we walked out to the car after managing to convince the manager of our side of the story with the help of a few other guests, the waiter was out there waiting. He had slashed our tires with another knife and was just about to jump us when my wife shouted for police and he ran. We had called for an Uber and she berated me the whole evening for not acting like a man. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I wound up staying at a friend's house that night and just getting super wasted. So thanks to the anonymous psycho waiter, who we ended up losing track of and never were actually able to get justice, your stirring speech and crazy antics from my wife and I got us separated and probably on our way to divorce. This was a while back. My husband decided to surprise me with a Valentine's Day suite to a secluded treehouse resort in the upper Ozark Mountains. On paper, it sounded extremely romantic, a getaway for just the two of us with no distractions. I knew he was probably going to try to get frisky as well, 'cause hey, it's Valentine's, so I wore something revealing and teased the whole drive up there. Unfortunately for us, you could say that the brochure lied. The treehouse looked nothing the way it was shown online. Instead of the sprawling multi-tiered bungalow that spanned the tops of cedars, we basically got a rickety house on stilts. James was furious, and I was upset too, but we had already paid the deposit, and it's not like we could just cancel and go. This was a lot of money down the drain. Needless to say, it made the start of our getaway a bit of a downer. Then as we got into the small room, I noticed that it was beginning to storm. Should we worry about this place falling down or something? I asked. I didn't want to be pessimistic, but it was easy to imagine this entire building collapsing because of a gentle breeze. Every time we walked, the whole thing kind of shook. We should probably stay close to the door just in case, he suggested. Even though things were pretty bad, I still wanted to try and get the best of our time together. After all, it wasn't just about the place. I wanted to really be with him, too. Let's get into the hot tub, I suggested. James didn't object and got the water running, but it seemed like it took forever for it to get hot, and then it only stayed hot for a few minutes. It was very disappointing, to say the least. Well, let's just go get a bottle of wine, he suggested instead. I didn't feel like arguing, a bit more frustrated now that everything was turning into a disaster, so he ran out to the car in the pouring rain and brought back a bottle of Chardonnay and a corkscrew bottle opener. You look sexy drenched, I teased him. He went to the kitchen cabinet and got out 2 wine glasses, pouring us some before offering a toast to making better memories. As we started to drink it, I had this weird vibe, or I guess a premonition, so to speak. I was thinking it would be crazy if James somehow had bit the glass and the wine shards would disperse into his mouth and cut him. A few seconds later, that was exactly what happened. He was taking another sip from his glass when this thing abruptly shattered in his mouth and he started to choke. I felt the whole room was moving in slow motion. I panicked and moved to hit his back, hoping he would choke it up. Then I asked if he wanted me to call 911. He shook at his head negatively and kept struggling to vomit up the blood. Silently, he gestured to help him into the bathroom, where he used his toothbrush to cause himself to gag. I stood there, holding up as shards of glass fell into the toilet. After that little ordeal, we cuddled up in bed and really didn't say much to each other. Honestly, I was starting to think this treehouse was haunted or something. And finally, James made the suggestion that we should go get some food and called around local places to see who would deliver. By this point, the storm had gotten so bad every time the wind shifted our whole cliff house and it felt like it was actually shaking. It was frightening, but I was trying to find the positive in this insane situation. It truly wasn't easy, especially after that choking incident. "Looks like we'll have to do pizza," James announced after calling 15 places, and you could tell his voice was really hoarse from that experience. It certainly wasn't as bad as it could be, I suppose. I didn't really care because by that point I was just starving and could probably eat anything. "It sounds great," I lied. And the driver claimed it would be there in 40 minutes, so we grabbed a shower while we waited. For a moment, it was nice to just forget about all the bad stuff that we had gone through. When the driver arrived to drop off our food, I was the one that answered the door. Not sure why I didn't bother to get dressed. I didn't see it as important, I guess. He was a younger guy, probably in his mid-20s, and likely hadn't really been around women the way he was ogling me. And I wasn't even really wearing anything that revealing, to be honest. How much?" I said when he seemed to forget why I had even come there. He stammered off the total price and gave us the pizza. My wallet's in the car. 1 second," James said, running toward our vehicle. The pizza guy followed. I was standing there holding the pizza box, watching them both out of the corner of my eye when I saw something strange happen. It looked like the driver had possibly hit James on the back of the head with something. And I later found out it was a tire iron because it had caused my husband to fall unconscious in less than a few seconds. It's hard for me to really properly describe that moment of terror. I knew what was happening, but I still couldn't believe it. This young kid marched back up to me as I stood there, transfixed and paralyzed, holding the pizza box. He had a knife in his hand that looked like it could easily slit my throat, and he demanded that I get on the bed and tie myself up. I climbed on the mattress as he instructed and did my best not to cry. I was sure this kid was about to have his way with me. He demanded that I use the bed sheets to tie up my hands and legs, and I was blubbering like a baby, telling him where my wallet was. Just take it and go. We won't call the cops, I swear," I told him. I didn't want him to hurt me, and it honestly felt like if I had said one wrong thing, this kid was going to snap. This definitely felt like a crime of opportunity. He was nervous and skittish and was constantly waving the knife around as a threat as I finished up the bonds in my hands. I made sure that my feet were loose enough that I could still fight in case he had any other ideas. Then he took my wallet back to his car and returned with his smartphone. He started to video me. I don't know if it was for his own sick pleasure or what, but I was just too terrified to really say anything unless prompted. A few times he spit on me. Finally, he decided that he'd had his fun and left before my husband finally came to. I sat there tied up on the bed for a good 30 minutes before James came stumbling into the room, looking frantic and confused by what had just happened. We called the cops immediately, but would you believe they didn't even bother to send anyone that night? Instead, we basically got no sleep because I was sure that Psycho would come back. I attended to James's wounds and did my best not to think about the fact that we were basically stranded up here in the mountains with no money. James insisted that it was going to be all right, but I was having a really hard time seeing the positive to any of this. In the AM, the cops finally came by the resort and wrote down everything we had told them, and we both did our best to provide a description of the driver and of his car. It really helped me to realize that I have a terrible memory because, for the life of me, I could only remember 2 or 3 things about this kid. He was white, he wore a baseball cap, and he had a southern accent, not exactly helpful. But the officers promised that they would keep us informed on any developments, and we were supposed to stay there another day and night without any protection. I know it's crazy to think that this psychopath might come back, but I told James that I didn't want to risk it. I don't care about the deposit. I just want to go home. And he agreed. He had already told his mother about what had happened over the Valentines, and she wired some money to his PayPal so we could afford some gas. On the way back home, I was busy calling and canceling credit cards and trying my best to forget about the whole thing. James instead insisted that we both go take self-defense courses, which I was not totally against. It just made me realize that he had been just as scared as me that day. A few months later, after a lot of back-and-forth hassle with the company, we did actually get most of our money back. They admitted in their email that it wasn't the first time their customers had reported suspicious activity on the property. Next time we plan a vacation, I'm picking. I teased James. It's crazy how we kind of laugh about it now all these years later, but dear God, if things had gone differently, I'm honestly not even sure I'd be here today. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join a live stream to catch an invite to my Discord. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, sleep tight, and don't let the bed bugs suck your toes.